People like to joke that nothing important ever happens on a Tuesday night. Monday is hated because it starts the week. Friday is loved because it starts the weekend. But Tuesday, it's just a filler, bland, and forgettable. I swear to you, though, every marriage disaster chooses Tuesday night to arrive. My name is David Miller, 42, a civil engineer. My whole life, I've measured straight lines and stress loads, counted the steel bars in a beam, and calculated the weight a bridge could bear. But the one thing I never thought I'd have to measure turned out to be the strength of my own marriage. My wife is Clara, 38, a high school music teacher. When we first met, she was gentle, her soprano voice so clear that whenever she sang Schubert, our little apartment seemed to glow. I used to joke with friends that marrying Clara was like winning the lottery, because who would have guessed a cement-dusted engineer like me could end up with an artist like her? But lately, Clara has become a different version of herself. She showers more, sings less. She used to let her hair stay messy while practicing scales, but now she takes long baths, sprays perfume, carefully does her makeup, then says she's off to teach students preparing for auditions. A singer who bathes more than she sings isn't aiming to hit higher notes. That Tuesday night, I came home late after a long day at the construction site. I walked into our bedroom, soft yellow light spilling over familiar things. The chair by the wardrobe, where Clara usually hung her bag, looked different. Her beige purse lay wide open, as if someone had stuffed too much inside and abandoned it. Half its contents had spilled onto the floor. Hair ties, lipstick, a few sheets of music, and a black hair clip. I bent down, picked each item up. To me, that kind of mess was no different than a crack in concrete. Small, but a warning sign. And then I saw it. A sleek silver box, cool to the touch, hidden among the lipsticks. I lifted it, turned it under the light. A box of Japanese condoms, imported, priced at half a week's groceries. What made my heart sink wasn't the shine of the package, but the fact that it was already open. Half of them were gone. In 15 years of marriage, we had never used these. When we needed them, we grabbed the cheap CVS kind, neither of us caring about brands. But this silver box was different. Polished, Japanese lettering, printed with care, clearly expensive. I muttered bitterly to myself, an engineer like me can spot a crack in a bridge, and I can damn well tell this silver box wasn't just for show. I sat on the edge of the bed, the box heavy in my hand, the weight no different than seeing a brand new bridge already sinking into its foundation. Details I had ignored suddenly returned. The nights Clara claimed she was teaching late. The rehearsals that left her hair wet and her skin smelling of perfume I didn't buy. All of it lined up into a blueprint whose conclusion was unavoidable. I could have thrown the box in her face the moment Clara walked through the door. I could have screamed, smashed things, demanded answers. But engineers don't demolish a structure the instant they see a crack. We measure, we monitor, we wait for the right time to intervene. And in this marriage, I decided to act like an engineer. I quietly slipped the silver box into the drawer, closed it, said nothing. At that moment, I knew our marriage had entered its load test. And I would be the one holding the pen, documenting every number, every vibration, until the day I presented the results and left no room for denial. My friends, I tell you this story not to complain, but to ask you, where are you watching from right now? New York, Texas, California, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Canada. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know how many people in this world have seen a crack like I have, not in a bridge, but in their own home. And this is only the beginning, because once an engineer starts measuring, the results will eventually be revealed. Clara thought I didn't know, but she forgot one thing. Every structure leaves a trace. After that fateful Tuesday night, I started paying closer attention. Not the jealous spying kind, but the way an engineer studies cracks in concrete. Look closely enough, and small signs connect into one long fracture. And Clara, my wife, the woman whose singing once earned applause through our paper-thin walls, now carried more storylines than Broadway. Sometimes she came home late, saying students needed extra lessons before exams. I nodded, sure, but in my head I thought, what student needs lessons until 11 at night? Who's she teaching, owls? Another time, She claimed she had choir practice at church, but walked in reeking of men's cologne and cheap beer. I said nothing. An engineer doesn't draw conclusions without data, but the data was piling up, brick by brick. One evening while cleaning the living room, I found Clara's iPad on the table. The screen lit up. I was never the type to snoop through my wife's devices. But once you found a silver box in her purse, all those don't touch her private things. Rules suddenly sound like a joke. I opened it, swiped through folders, notes, Spotify, photos, normal stuff. But one folder stood out. Scores, I smirked. Scores sounded professional, like sheet music a voice teacher would keep. I tapped it, expecting Schubert or Mozart. Instead, there was only one dull gray app, a chat app I'd never seen Clara use. I opened it, and then the name at the top of the list, Henry Collins. The profile picture was a shadow, but the words were clear enough. Reading them felt like a drill boring straight into my gut. Can't wait to see you Thursday. Got us the usual room at the Marriott. Bring the silver one. The silver one. Exactly, the silver box I'd found in her purse. I kept scrolling, message after message, like a song stripped of morality. No pauses between the notes. You looked amazing in that red dress. Last time was unforgettable. Next time, we'll try to something new. I wanted to laugh, and I did. Not the happy kind, but the bitter laugh you let out when an apprentice forgets to add sand to the concrete mix. God help me. My wife, a music teacher, was sneaking around with Henry Collins, a dancer, 33, bulging muscles, cheap tank tops, hair slicked with drugstore shampoo. In the messages, Clara calls him my fire after music. I slumped into the chair thinking, he thinks he's Patrick Swayze in Dirty Dancing, but he's really just the discount bin version. Expired coupon included. The irony burned. I was a civil engineer calculating how bridges hold thousands of tons. Clara, the woman who once vowed to stand by me until death, had chosen a dance instructor, the kind of man whose biggest load to carry was a set of dumbbells. I held the iPad, a storm of anger, sorrow, and disdain swirling inside me. But I didn't explode. I didn't storm into the bedroom, hurl the iPad, or scream like a husband in a bad soap opera. I switched it off, put it back. Then, like an engineer on site, I pulled out a notebook and wrote, Clara, affair, subject, Henry Collins. Evidence, Marriott, silver one, Thursday. See, construction and marriage aren't that different. You need a blueprint, you need data, you need proof. Otherwise, when the judge asks, what evidence do you have? All you'll do is stammer like a student who forgot his homework. From that day, I started collecting. Credit card bills with hotel charges, messages Clara left on her iPad, odd late-night lessons. I saved everything into a folder on my laptop, pass protected under load capacity. Because I knew one day this marriage would collapse. And when it did, I'd have all the data to show exactly why. Clara kept playing her part, dresses, perfume, and humming a few notes in the kitchen to keep up appearances. But I saw behind the curtain. I looked at her and thought, this is the woman who once taught Ave Maria, now singing a different tune at the Marriott. I didn't blame myself. I didn't ask why me. I just thought life is like construction. No bridge is without cracks. And the key is knowing when to let it fall. And believe me, I already had the blueprint for that collapse. I'm not the kind of man who takes reckless revenge. An engineer who loses his temper on site is no different than giving the workers a reason to quit. A bridge collapses before it's finished. Who pays the price? You do. So when I saw Clara grinning while texting Henry about the silver one, I only smirked. By coincidence, that silver box was already in my hands, and I knew exactly how to make it their final project. In my kitchen drawer, I had a tube of industrial adhesive, the kind that bonds steel plates as if welded. I pried open the silver case, pumped clear glue inside, then sealed it carefully back up to look untouched. An engineer knows how to make anything look original, even when it's been turned into a trap. Looking at that silver box sitting neat and clean, I thought to myself, at last my marriage had a touch of creativity. That evening, Clara brewed tea in the kitchen. Chamomile, sweet and sharp, was something I had never seen her drink. She set the cup in front of me with a soft smile. Drink it, it'll help you sleep. I looked at the cup, then into her eyes. A perfect performance. I lifted it to my lips, pretended to swallow a few sips, then discreetly poured the rest into the potted orchid behind me. That plant must still remember the night it was the one that slept well instead of me. Around midnight, I heard Clara stir. She thought I was sound asleep, breathing evenly. I even added a few snores to reassure her. At exactly 12, she slipped out of bed. The door clicked open softly like a thief sneaking out of her own house. I waited 15 seconds, then rose, put on my robe, and followed quietly. What I didn't expect was that Henry, the dancer, lived one floor above, in 3B. A cruel joke of fate. They had been rehearsing all this time right above me while I sat downstairs calculating bridge loads. I pressed against the door of 3C and heard them clearly. Clara's giggle, Henry's deep, confident voice. "Did you bring it?" Henry asked, lowering his voice as if discussing state secrets. "Of course, the silver one you like," Clara replied, eager and excited. I almost laughed out loud. If only they knew what upgrades I had made to that silver, they'd already be running barefoot down the stairs. A few minutes later, the familiar sounds began. Bed creaks, laughter, then suddenly a strange silence. Then Henry's shout. "What the hell, why? Why won't it come off?" Clara panicked. "What? What do you mean? Try again." Rustling, frantic grunts, but not the kind they wanted. "Oh my God, we're stuck. No way. You're sure this is the right silver?" "It is. It's the one you love." I leaned back against the wall, stifling my laughter until tears blurred my eyes. The satisfaction was indescribable, like proving a calculation right after being told you were wrong, and watching the bridge stand tall anyway. Half an hour passed. I heard water running, fabric rubbing, soap, warm water. Then the kitchen drawers opened, clinking bottles, and they tried cooking oil. Futile. I hadn't used office glue. I had used the kind that holds bridge steel. Finally, Henry yelled, "We have to call an emergency. We can't stay like this." "No, don't. It's humiliating," Clara sobbed. "You want to stay till morning? I'm in agony." By 2 a.m., I heard the doorbell upstairs. Hurried footsteps. EMTs arrived. I peeked through the crack. Two young paramedics tried to keep straight faces, but their shoulders shook with suppressed laughter. They wheeled in a stretcher, then guided the pitiful pair, fused together, out of the apartment. It was like a scene from a dark comedy, except it was happening live before me. A neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins from 3D, managed to record it on her phone. I caught the glow of her screen. Thank you, I thought, living proof secured. For now, though, it can stay private. When the elevator doors closed, I returned to my apartment. I poured myself a whiskey, the burns sliding down my throat as I smirked. This was only a load test, not a demolition. Claire and Henry were getting their free workout in an ambulance, locked in a position no one would dare remember. And I sat here calm, steady, like an engineer watching a simulation collapse exactly as predicted. The best part was that the accident was still private. No one but the EMTs and one neighbor knew. Claire and Henry would think they escaped, chalking it up to embarrassment. But for me, it was the first crack, because every structure begins to fall from a small fracture, and no one knows better than I how to double a crack. That night, I finished my whiskey, staring out the window. The city slept quietly. Only I knew that up on the third floor, two people were literally stuck together, and only I knew this was just the overture to their collapse. Tomorrow, I will be back on site measuring the loads of a new bridge. But tonight, I had witnessed another structure begin to fail, one named Clara and Henry, and I would be the engineer overseeing its downfall. The next morning, Clara came home limping, her face pale like she had just walked off a failed performance. I was sipping my coffee when she stumbled in, hair a tangled mess, coat wrinkled. "You look like a cement mixer chewed you up and spit you back out," I said, voice dripping with sarcasm. She forced a weak smile. "I fell down the stairs at school, twisted my back. The doctor said it's fine." Ah, fell down the stairs, a classic script, right up there with walked into a door in the book of excuses. I took another sip of coffee, nodding like I was listening to a technical report. "Yeah, stairs are dangerous. They should put up a warning sign. Watch out for strange dancers." Clara shot me a look, maybe sensing something off, But I calmly turned a page of the newspaper and let her sit, clutching her side, groaning softly. Inside, I laughed. Last night's super glue accident must still be ringing in her head, and now she was covering it up with a stare story. A decent attempt at improvisation if I hadn't already read every message on her iPad. That afternoon, I decided to cook. An engineer doesn't just calculate concrete loads. We know how to mix formulas, and a meal is just another equation. Clara said her stomach was weak and needed something light. I nodded. Sure, I'll cook. But in my mind, I was composing a symphony of spice. I started with barbecue ribs marinated in Carolina Reaper, the hottest pepper on earth. Each piece was soaked in crimson fire, as if straight from hell. I added habanero for flavor depth, then a shake of cayenne just to make sure no one could still feel their tongue. West came a Mexican hot soup, a recipe I pulled from the internet in 5 minutes. The formula was simple: toss in anything with a high Scoville rating and stir. I smiled to myself. If there were a Richter scale for stomachs, this soup would be a 9-point earthquake. To top it off, I roasted whole heads of garlic until the air was thick with pungent smoke, strong enough to chase vampires out of 5 states. A perfect dinner for someone with a delicate stomach. Clara walked into the kitchen and saw the table neatly set. Relief flickered in her eyes. She must have thought, oh, my husband still cares, still believes the stare story. Sit down, I said, pulling out a chair with polite grace. Tonight I made something special, all light and easy. She smiled, sat down, staring at the soup glowing red like molten lava. Looks delicious. She took the first spoonful. For 3 seconds, her face relaxed, eyes closing as if savoring it. By the 4th second, sweat poured down. Her lips burned crimson, her hands trembled. A little spicy, she gasped. Spicy? I raised a brow. You're too sensitive. This is just warming. She forced down a few more bites, but her stomach fought back. I had to press my lips together to hide the laugh, pretending to look concerned. Then the doorbell rang. I opened it to see Henry standing there, hair slicked, hoodie half-zipped, face strained like he'd just staggered out of boot camp. Is Clara home? He asked, eyes darting nervously. I nodded and swung the door wide. Ah, Henry, right? Come in. Clara just sat down for dinner. He flinched, clearly not expecting my hospitality. Still, he stepped in. I pulled out another chair, set a steaming bowl in front of him. Sit, eat. I made plenty. He hesitated but sat. Clara's eyes widened in panic, but before she could speak, Henry took his first spoonful. His reaction matched hers, only faster. His face twisted, his eyes bulged, and he coughed hard. I leaned forward, pretending to worry. What's wrong? Too rich? Hot, he gasped. It's just soup, I said, patting his shoulder with a grin. Good for the health. A dancer should handle it fine. In my mind, I thought, if he can manage a salsa, right now, it'll be a salsa on fire. The dinner turned into a spice trial. Clara wiped sweat, forcing a smile. Henry bent over, trying to swallow. I cut my ribs leisurely, chewing with ease. This meat is tender, I praised myself. The secret is marinating overnight in Carolina Reaper. Henry sucked in air, face red like a warning light. Clara glanced at him, then at me, eyes sparkling with both anger and fear. Neither spoke. They just suffered while I enjoyed the calmest meal I'd had in years. When the final dish, roasted garlic, came out, Clara refused. Henry pushed his chair back, clutching his stomach. I shrugged, popped a clove into my mouth, and crunched it loudly. You're missing out. This is the essence. Both excused themselves quickly. I nodded, letting them rush out like school kids fleeing music class after botching a note. That night, I washed the dishes in silence, feeling like I had just finished a concert where the only audience, Clara and Henry, had to walk out midway thanks to their protesting stomachs. See, I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight. All it took was a pot of soup and a little humor. My own symphony of spice, composed for 2 frauds. And I knew this was only the overture. The real notes were still ahead, where laughter would fade and truth would finally thunder. If the symphony of spice dinner was a playful overture for the stomach, then I was ready to compose the next movement in my revenge symphony, this time with a sharper, burning note. Clara still complained about her back pain and said she needed a recovery cream. She placed a tube of expensive doctor-prescribed ointment in the bathroom and asked me to fetch it. I looked at it and thought, perfect timing. In my toolbox, I had something special, capsaicin cream. It's harmless on stiff knees, but anyone who has ever made the mistake of applying it near sensitive skin knows it feels like being pepper sprayed. I removed the label from Clara's prescription, squeezed out the contents, and carefully filled it with capsaicin. I screwed the cap back on, wiped it clean, and placed it exactly where it had been. An engineer knows how to disguise a structure, even when the inside is already rotting. That night, Clara went to bed early. I lay beside her, pretending to study blueprints for a new overpass, ears tuned to the sound of her applying the cream. 1 minute passed, then 5, and then the performance began. First came the faint moans like a singer warming up. Then suddenly a scream split the air, high-pitched, long, enough to earn a standing ovation at any opera. I looked up, feigning surprise. Practicing Carmen for your students? But Clara wasn't singing Carmen. She thrashed on the bed, face red, sweat pouring. "Oh God, it's burning! It's on fire!" she screamed, voice breaking like a collapsing rhythm. Her cries echoed down the hall. Neighbors banged on the wall and shouted, "Clara, practice earlier. Some of us need sleep." They thought she was rehearsing too late. I sat in a chair, chin resting on my hand, watching her like I would watch a bridge shudder in a storm. This was the interesting moment, when a structure once thought solid starts to shake so badly you begin to consider collapse. Half an hour later, Clara was trembling, sobbing, begging for help. At last, I agreed to take her to the hospital. I guided her to the car, calm as if I were driving a student to a recital instead of a wife howling from a chemical burn. At the hospital, the doctor frowned as he examined her. Severe tissue damage, likely chemical reaction. We'll need a minor procedure to remove the affected tissue to prevent infection. I nodded, voice steady. If an overpass cracks, would you just leave it standing? You remove the damaged section, don't you? The doctor didn't follow my metaphor, but Clara did. She burst into tears. She looked at me, hoping for anger, panic, the tender hand of a husband from a TV drama. Instead, I sat in the plastic chair in the hallway, legs crossed, reading an old construction magazine. At 3 in the morning, the procedure ended. The doctor came out, serious. We stabilized her, but the damage was severe. There may be lasting effects. I thanked him, then looked through the glass at Clara lying pale and weak. I entered, pulled up a chair, and smiled softly. You're strong, to sing that loud and still keep breathing. She turned her face away, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't need her to, because I knew. The Spice Games had only been a warm-up. This medical blow was the real turning point. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was the first sign of a structure truly failing. On the way home, I felt no exhaustion, only the certainty that everything was unfolding according to plan. The silver box, the dinner, the capsaicin, all of it like a blueprint I had drawn. Once the frame is set, the collapse follows on schedule. Clara thought it was just an accident, a side effect. But I knew nothing is random once an engineer holds the ruler. From that night on, I looked at her the way I would look at a building with cracked foundations. Outsiders might not see it yet, but I did. It was beyond repair. And as an engineer, I don't patch. I bring it down clean. Watching Clara in that hospital bed, I thought to myself, this isn't a prank anymore. This is the beginning of truth. The hospital room was stark white, reeking of antiseptic, the fluorescent lights buzzing like an off-key choir. Clara lay there, her face ashen, hair plastered to her forehead, eyes once proud now dulled like rotting wood. The night before, she had screamed until her voice broke. An opera no one bought tickets for, only the neighbors got in for free. Now she had no strength left to sing. I walked in carrying a thick folder and sat in the hard plastic chair by her bed. She glanced at me, hoping for pity. Instead, I opened the folder, laying out one item after another on the tray table as if presenting evidence in court. Here, photos of your messages with Henry. I set them down, the paper shining under the lamp. Here, Marriott hotel receipts, several nights, the same evenings you claim choir practice. And here, bank records. Our joint credit card was spent on wine, VIP rooms, not a dime for family. Clara turned her head away, lips trembling. I continued, voice steady like a project report. And finally, divorce papers. Simple. I keep the house, the assets, and custody. You keep the hospital bills. I smiled, placing the pen on the table. Fair as a symphony. Hit the wrong notes, you pay the price. Her eyes widened, then she let out a dry laugh, faint at first, then spiraling into ragged bursts, not joy, but the jagged laugh of strings snapping after being stretched too tight. You think you're clever, she gasped between laughs. Henry was only one of them. The words landed like a hammer on cracked steel. But I didn't flinch. I had suspected as much. The silver box, the messages, the trail, it was never just one man. That's so, I said calmly. Thanks for confirming. She shouted, you think you've won. You know nothing about me, about the life I wanted. You only know concrete, bridges, and your stupid numbers. I cut her off, not loud, just deliberate. And it's those numbers that tell me what stands and what collapses. She choked on her breath, eyes wet. Then she laughed again, hoarse and sharp, like a violin string dragged across the wrong note. I sat silent. I had seen buildings before they fell, shaking on the outside, hollow within. Quietly, I pulled out my phone, snapped a few photos. Clara drained, evidence spread across the table. Divorce papers beside her. Living proof of the day, truth could no longer be denied. What are you going to do, she snarled. Smear me in court. I shrugged. I don't need to smear. Truth is filthy enough on its own. The words silenced her. The only sound left was the monitor's steady beep, ticking like a countdown clock. I stood, gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and left the pen on the table, a reminder that the choice sat right in front of her ear. She could sign or watch me take it all to court. I wasn't in a rush. An engineer never rushes once the cracks have formed. Before leaving, I turned, locking eyes with her. You know, music can lie. People hit high notes, pretend to reach heaven, but it's just a spring stretched too far. Numbers don't lie, they expose everything. And I have all the numbers I need. She laughed again, bitter, tears mixing with sweat. I ignored her. I walked out, shutting the door softly behind me. In my hand, the folder grew heavier by the day. Messages, receipts, bank records, and now her own confession that Henry wasn't the only one. Like any rotten structure, all I had to do was wait for it to collapse. And when it did, I'd be there. Not shouting, not demanding victory, just pointing, saying, this is what truly happened. An engineer doesn't need theatrics. We only need evidence. And with Clara, I already had an entire building of it ready to come crashing down. If the hospital was where Clara lost her powerful soprano voice from screaming and chemical burns, then the iPad was where she left behind the entire chorus of her sins. I had once thought Henry was just a cheap dancer Clara had stumbled into. But it turned out that Salsa Boy was only the prelude. One night while Clara was still in the hospital, I sat in the living room and opened her iPad. I had grown used to checking thoroughly. An engineer never ignores the sub-drawings. The folder named Scores lit up again, just like before. I tapped deeper this time. Beyond Henry, there were dozens of others, teachers, musicians, and even a few more trainers from the gym. The chats tangled together like a discordant symphony with not a single pure note. What shocked me wasn't just the number. They even had a secret group with a name that sounded elegant, the Ensemble. They called it a community of artists, teachers, and dancers exchanging skills. But a closer read showed me exactly what kind of skills they meant. Flowery words, coded phrases everywhere. There were schedules, assigned roles, and performances. Looking at it, I thought bitterly, Clara had gone from being a music teacher to the conductor of an underground orchestra. The deeper I scrolled, the uglier it got. There were hotel bills not charged to her personal card, but to the school's arts fund, a card meant only for official classes and performances. Clara had used it to pay for private lessons at the Marriott. This wasn't just about marriage anymore. This was criminal. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shocked. I just sat there sipping coffee, scrolling through evidence like I was reviewing a structural report. An engineer who sees cracked steel and rotted concrete isn't surprised. He just writes up the conclusion. And this time, the conclusion wasn't for Clara, it was for my lawyer. The next morning, I carried the entire set of data, screenshots, bills, and chat logs into my lawyer's office. He read in silence, then shook his head. David, this isn't just divorce anymore. You can hand this to the authorities. These are red flags for financial fraud and prostitution fronts. I smirked. I'm only doing what an engineer does, reporting when I see a dangerous structure. Within a week, an official investigation was opened. From Clara's iPad, they traced an entire network. Arts teachers laundering money through school funds, young dancers providing services after hours, and even a few social figures are tangled up. The ensemble wasn't just a chat group. It was a parasitic underground ring feeding off grants and public money. I was summoned as a witness. Sitting in the interview room, I felt like I was giving a lecture on overpasses. Only today's blueprints were erotic chats and hotel receipts. The investigators took notes, nodded grimly. One muttered under his breath, "Hard to believe." A music teacher, so proper on the outside. I laughed sharply. The surface of concrete can be polished, smooth, but if the inside is hollow, it's only waiting to collapse. The rumors spread fast, first whispers in the arts community, then local papers reported financial fraud in the music program, names withheld, but everyone guessed. The probe expanded. Federal agents stepped in, accounts frozen, assets combed through. Those secret rehearsals turned into criminal evidence. Clara, still lying in her hospital bed, didn't know the world outside had changed its tune. From a victim of a staircase fall, she had become the centerpiece of a scandalous orchestra. I said nothing. I still went to sites, inspected beams, and talked with crews. At night, I sat on the porch with whiskey, listening to the news. Each report was another hammer strike against the rotting bridge named Clara. This time, I didn't need to swap creams or spike dinners. All I had to do was submit the folder and wait, because from that moment on, the story was no longer a domestic tragedy. It was a public case. Clara wanted to play music. She chose the wrong orchestra. And now the audience wasn't nosy neighbors. It was the full weight of the law, waiting to applaud when the curtain finally came down. If I once thought the superglue accident would remain private, just two cheaters stuck together in a third-floor apartment, then I underestimated the power of the internet age. Mrs. Jenkins in 3D hadn't filmed that clip just for memories. She posted it straight to Facebook with the caption, "When you tell your husband you're on a business trip but end up stuck somewhere else." Within 2 days, the video hit 100,000 views. By the end of the week, it had passed 1 million, popping up on gossip sites. People clipped it, added disco music, and titled it Ambulance Tango. And Henry, the wannabe dancer, officially became the face of the move Too Sticky. Memes spread everywhere. Henry clutching Clara stiffly with the words "dance move too sticky." The dance troupe Henry worked for didn't take long to decide. A cold announcement on their website. "We have terminated Henry Collins's contract due to conduct unbecoming of a public artist." In plain English, they didn't want ticket buyers thinking their show was about to turn into a circus act with medics. His side deals collapsed too. Zumba classes, gym endorsements, all canceled. The gym owner said flat out, "Customers come here to sweat, not to remember an ambulance video." Clara's fall was even harsher. The music school suspended her, citing financial irregularities under investigation. Colleagues turned cold. Students whispered. One former pupil posted, "She always told us music was pure." Turns out she was singing a different tune at the Marriott. I passed the church one day and heard the choir murmuring. Someone shook their head. Even the church choir doesn't want to hear her soprano anymore. I laughed. Clara once stood front row, proud, belting out Ave Maria. Now, if she opened her mouth, people would only remember her midnight screams from Capsaicin. Friends vanished. The women who used to invite her for coffee suddenly had excuses. Neighbors avoided her, glancing, whispering. Even the supermarket cashier where Clara used to shop scanned her items in silence, no longer greeting her. It all fell like dominoes. One push, the ambulance clip, toppled everything. A private accident turned into a public joke. And the cruelest irony, I never had to say a word. I just sat on the porch, watching the world finish the job for me. That night, I poured a glass of whiskey and rewatched the clip on YouTube. Sirens blared, Henry grimaced, and Clara sobbed. The comment section was a festival. Thought it was a comedy skit. Turns out it was real. Best collab of the year, Henry et Clara, when performance art becomes emergency art. I set my glass down, exhaling, and felt a strange calm. Not because they suffered, but because sometimes justice doesn't need a gavel, just a neighbor's phone and the internet. Looking at Clara now, I wasn't angry anymore. She was like a burned-out bridge, a structure whose own designer poured fuel, struck the match, and stood watching. And me, the engineer, only needed to jot the note. Cause of failure, self-inflicted fire. From here, nothing would ever be private again. And that was the one thing Clara never saw coming. No audience, no students, no choir left to hear her song. Only the mocking applause of the online crowd where a single ambulance clip had become the full stop on her career and her name. And me, I just sat back, calm, waiting for the next movement in their collapsing symphony. I sat on the porch of the house I had just rebuilt, evening wind carrying the scent of fresh wood and faint paint. In front of me rested an old wooden table. On it lay my Mont Blanc engineer's pen, bought back when I was still a young man, and right beside it, the empty silver box, the only relic I kept from all the ruin. It sat there quietly, harmless like a keepsake. But to me, it was a coffin lid, sealing away everything Clara had sown. I signed the last set of papers. The divorce was finalized, assets were divided. Clara carried hospital debt and scandal, and Henry lost his career and any chance of performing again. And me, I kept the house, the work, and most important, my son. But I didn't stop there. I used part of what I reclaimed to establish the Clara Miller Scholarship Fund. It sounded ironic, and that was the point. The fund was for struggling music students. If Clara had turned music into a doorway to darkness, I wanted music to return to its rightful place, a light. For me, that was the way to close the coffin lid on the past, by turning her shame into someone else's chance. I remember the moment the pen touched the page. The ink slid smoothly, the strokes neat and firm. No hesitation, no tremor, just like approving the final blueprint of a bridge. Only this time the structure wasn't concrete and steel. It was my life. I told myself, this road is finished. No more pits to fall into. Only solid ground to rebuild on. Leaning back, I watched the sunset turn the distant mountains red. In my mind, a wordless melody played, slow but steady, like the heartbeat of a man who no longer fears. And I said to myself, and to anyone listening to this story, I don't need to shout. I don't need to explain. I don't need to beg belief. Truth carries its own echo. Clara screamed, Henry performed, and together they made clowns of themselves. I stayed silent, collected evidence, and laid each brick until truth built its own wall. And once the wall stood, no one needed me to yell. They could see who was left outside. Silence isn't weakness. It's the strongest steel I've ever known. It lets you stand firm while everything else shakes. It turns patience into a blade, without knives, without noise. Now, sitting on this porch, I don't feel like a victim anymore. I am the engineer who completed the hardest project of his life. Proof that truth doesn't need spectacle, only patience. And I want to leave you with this. If you believe silence and truth are the strongest weapons, hit subscribe, turn on notifications. Here you'll find stories where betrayal collapses on itself, while the cast-off reclaim their worth. Before you leave, drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels, from Denver, where I live, to whatever corner of the world you call home. Because one thing is certain, wherever you are, truth speaks the same language. And when it rises, it doesn't need a microphone. It doesn't need a paid audience. It carries farther than any song Clara ever taught. I picked up the empty silver box, placed it gently in an old drawer, and closed it. Not to remember, but to remind. Remind myself that some cracks can't be repaired. Some bridges must be torn down. And after the rubble, we can always build again. Stronger, more beautiful, more enduring. That was my ending. And maybe it can be your beginning.